Chapter 27, Irregular Comparison. Chapter 27 covers the following: the formation of irregular comparative and superlative forms, for instance, bonus, melior, optimus, meaning good, better, best. And at the end of the lesson, we'll review the vocabulary, which you should memorize in this chapter. There are two important rules to remember in this chapter. Rule 1. There are 6 third declension adjectives with irregular superlatives. Their positive forms end lis in the masculine and feminine nominative singular, and their superlatives end limus. For example, facilimus. Rule 2. All adjectives of any declension which have nominative singular masculine forms ending er, for example, liber, form superlatives which end rimus, such as liberimus. This chapter, the last before we take the first test in this class, is basically an exercise in memorization. There are no new grammatical concepts introduced here. Most Indo-European languages incorporate some way of elevating the degree of adjectives, and I don't know of one where at least a few of those forms aren't irregular. Remember, irregularity is a sign they're being used a lot. A little linguistics may help make some sense out of the irregularities certain Latin comparative forms exhibit, but it can't take you all the way. You're going to have to do some memorizing. Better that than a big new concept like participles right before the test, huh? Better? Notice that? Irregular comparative in English. Why don't we say gooder? Sounds gooder to me than better. Except every time I said it, my teacher sent me to stand in the corner. How cruel we are to our children. Speaking of which, here are the easiest of the forms associated with irregular adjective comparison in Latin. 6 superlative forms, all third declension, which use limus in place of isimus. Their positive forms all end lis-le, L-I-S-L-E. For instance, facilis facile, meaning easy, the superlative of which is facilimus. Its negative, difficilis, meaning difficult, has a superlative difficilimus. And similis, meaning like, as in alike, has a superlative similimus. To these could be added the negative of similis, dissimilis, and its superlative dissimilimus, along with gracilimus from gracilis, and humilimus from humilis. Wheelock includes these in footnote 1, page 127. But since they're not on the vocabulary list for this or any chapter in Wheelock, you're not required to know them. Small blessings are gooder than none. There is another type of irregular superlative, adjectives whose nominative singular masculine forms end in er. This includes adjectives of any declension, such as liber and pulcher, first, second, and acer, third. Their superlatives also omit the usual ISS and double the final consonant of the base, producing rimus as in liberimus, pulcherimus, acerimus. Originally the ending was simus, but L plus S in Latin assimilated to LL. Thus, facilsimus became facilimus. Likewise, R plus S in Latin assimilated to RR. Thus, acersimus became acerimus. I mention this because it may help make sense of another form we'll encounter in a moment, maximus, meaning greatest, which is really mag plus simus, where GS became X. All of that is fairly easy, isn't it? Say yes. Well, you will after you see the irregular comparisons we're about to confront, which are way more irregular than that. Now here I get why people don't say irregular-er, which is definitely not gooder than more irregular. And there are various reasons why these irregular comparisons looming ahead present the greater challenge here. First, because of phonology, the way words are pronounced. sounds inside these irregular forms blend together more often. For example, mag plus eor produces mayor. The G sound drops out. Also in general, irregular comparison more often involves composite forms, where different bases have conflated into one system. That is, the positive comes from one word root, but the comparative and superlative come from another. A good example is English better and best, which come from the root bought, meaning compensation. By another linguistic path, this root gives us our word booty, like pirate booty. Booty is a good thing, especially to a pirate. Unfortunately, not all irregular comparison can be explained away so easily. For instance, the Latin comparative for good, melior, which is just as irregular as our better, simply cannot be traced or explained linguistically. Nor can its opposite peios, meaning worse, the comparative for bad, or its close relative pessimus, meaning worst. All we can say here is things have gone from badder to baddest. So let's chart them. The 7 severely, in some cases inexplicably, irregular comparative and superlative forms in Latin, bearing in mind that their irregularity is a byproduct of their frequent use. First up, bonus, meaning good, whose comparative is melior melius, meaning better, as we just noted, of unknown origin, to quote the dictionary. Its superlative is optimus, meaning best, which is probably a compound of the prefix ob, meaning against, face to face, up in front of something, and the superlative suffix simus, in the form timus here, meaning that the original sense of optimus was frontist. The best things often do stand out. Magnus, meaning large or great, has a comparative major maius, meaning greater. A combination of mag, meaning big, compare magnus, and the comparative ending eor. Its superlative maximus, meaning greatest, as we noted before, was originally magsimus, which is close to predictable if you're following the linguistics here. Malus, meaning bad, has a comparative peior, peius, meaning worse, and a superlative pessimus, meaning worst. Their eor, eos, and simus endings are no surprise, but the etymology of the pay base seen in both is unclear. The comparative of multus, meaning much or many, looks wildly irregular. Plus. It's built on the same base, play, meaning fill or full, that gives us our Latin derivative plenty. So it uses a totally different root from multus, making it a classic example of composite comparison. Two linguistic swatches quilted together into one fabric. But that's only one of the issues here. Plus is not an adjective, which is kind of unusual for a comparative adjective. It's a noun, a third declension neuter noun. It means more, like, I want more. That's in the singular. In the plural, it goes back to being what it should be, an adjective, like, I want more adjectives, that are actually adjectives. Note, no masculine or feminine forms in the singular. Nouns don't change gender, normally. It's just plus, plurus. No dative is attested in ancient texts, so we can't just assume it was pluri, which is what the dative ought to be. Plus, don't forget, neuter nominatives and accusatives are always the same. And plure, not I stem, at least not in the singular. So how do you say more something? For example, more money, more wisdom. More money. You use a genitive, technically a partitive genitive. More about that in a later chapter. For instance, plus virtutis, more, literally of, courage. Then, as we just said, the plural goes back to being what it should be, an adjective. Plures, plura, plurium, pluribus, plures, plura, pluribus. And third declension. So just as you'd expect for a comparative adjective, which are all third declension and I stem, its genitive plural is plurium. Why its neuter nominative and accusative plural isn't pluria? No idea. But it isn't. It's plura. All I can say is memorize it. Back to the main chart and the superlative of multis, plurimus, meaning most. It's an adjective throughout its declension. Hallelujah. And it has the by now familiar imus ending we've seen in a raft of simus and timus superlative forms, which makes it seem almost regular, at least by comparison to its comparative. Plurimus is actually all but predictable if you understand that it's really plus plus imus, which changed in Latin to plurimus through a process we mentioned before, Rhotacism, literally R-ing, where a single S in between vowels changes to R. This is not the last time we'll run into Rhotacism. Parvus, small, has a comparative minor minus, meaning less. The same base is seen in the English derivatives minus and diminish. The superlative is minimus, meaning least. Surely you can think of a few derivatives here. Minimal, minimum, Minnie-Mouse. Just kidding. The next form, prior prius, meaning former, is defective, having no positive degree, only a comparative and superlative. You have to have two things to be able to put one in front of the other. That's why there's no positive. You can't be in front of only yourself. Well, you can, but you have to be schizophrenic. And grammatically, that counts as two of you. Thus, the only way to show the positive form of the base underlying prior is in the prepositions pro and pri, meaning before, which is why Mr. Wheelock adds those in parentheses where the positive ought to be. The superlative is primus, meaning first. To deploy this word properly, there should be at least three things. In other words, to have a first, you have to have a second and a third. It drives me crazy when a person is standing in front of me and says, "I'm first." You're not. You're in front. First implies there are at least three of us. And since there are only two, that implies one of the two of us is schizophrenic, which isn't nice and isn't me. I didn't convince you to stop saying that, did I? Okay, fine, go ahead. Corrupt the English language. See if I care. You just made dying and leaving this world all that much easier for me. Please note easier, proper use of the comparative degree. And the last of the 7 deadly adjectives, superus, meaning above, has a comparative superior, superius, meaning higher, which is not actually irregular. You even know the base super from the preposition super, which means above. Nothing really challenging here. The superlative is the issue. There are two, neither predictable. One, summus, which has a sense highest, and a second, supremus, which has a different connotation, last. That is, the former shows altitude and the latter place in order. Again, please note correct use of comparatives, former and latter, not first and last. Not only do we use adjective comparison a lot, the Romans did too. And so a lot of comparative and superlative forms leaked into English from Latin. Let's look at a few. They can help you memorize the Latin forms, if you recognize the English word. If you don't, you'll expand your English vocabulary. Either way, you'll be gooder. I'll give you an English word derived from a Latin comparative or superlative form. You tell me, or guess, its definition. Let's start with ameliorate. What does melior mean in Latin? Better. This is a verb, so what do you guess it means? To make things better. And who hopes you do? An optimist, who is always thinking things will turn out for the best. What does major mean literally? Greater. as in the greater part of something, like the courses you take in college. And maximal? What degree is maximus? Superlative? So up the intensity of the adjective and you get the greatest part of something. What do you think pejorative means? What does peor mean in Latin? Worse? So there's no way this substantive adjective can refer to something pleasing, can it? This has got to mean a very bad word, a curse. What about pessimist? That's a person who always thinks the worst will happen. Here's a simple one, plus, like 1 + 1. What does plus actually mean? More. So 1 + 1 is literally 1 more by 1. And if things are plural, they're more than one. Now what about the American motto, a pluribus unum? You can translate that now. Unum means one thing. A is the same as X, which means from. And pluribus, what degree? Comparative, meaning more, quite a few. Translation, from quite a few things, one thing. That is, unity arising from plurality. What about the English word minor? What does it mean literally? The lesser part, as in the lesser part of your course load. And minimize? To make smallest, or just very small. Prior, former. Prime, foremost. Superior, higher. Summit, the highest part of something. Supreme, literally the last, the final, the ultimate. Like pizza that includes everything and will block your arteries and kill you, so it will be your last. But before that happens, let's do the vocabulary for this chapter. A great way to spend your last moments on Earth. And speaking of Earth, the first word is sol solis, masculine, meaning sun, the thing up in the sky, not the child you accidentally created. It's a third declension, masculine noun. From this word, English gets the derivative solar. But the Indo-European sol base underlying this word has also come into English through another, less obvious path. The Greek word helios, which also means sun and gave us our word helium, so called because the element was first identified when scientists were studying the sun. But you say, hel doesn't look like sol. Ah, but it does, if you perform a little linguistic magic. In the same way that Latin, at one point in its history, experienced Rhotacism, and some S's changed into R's, Greek went through a period where an S at the beginning of a word changed into H. You can see that in English derivatives based on Latin and Greek numbers. Where Latin has sex, meaning 6, Greek has hex, as in hexagon. Likewise, Greek hepta, meaning 7, is equivalent to Latin septem, as in September. So the sun base sol changed to hel in Greek. Okay, enough linguistics. What will be the ablative singular of this word? It's third declension, and it's monosyllabic in its nominative singular, but is it I stem? Nope, there aren't two consonants at the end of its base. So, no I in the ablative singular. The correct answer is sole. Next word, acer, acris, acre, meaning sharp, keen, eager, severe, or fierce. It's a third declension adjective, and you can safely assume any third declension adjective is I stem. Remember that the term for a word like this is three termination, because it has 3 different endings in the nominative singular. Can you get the base from the masculine, the first form, acer? No, the base contracts. You see the base first in the feminine nominative singular, acris. Drop the is ending and you have acra, ACR. That's the base. So what is the genitive plural of acer? That's right. Acrium. It's I stem. And the accusative plural neuter? Acria. You got it. Here's another third declension adjective. Facilis facile, meaning easy or agreeable. It has to be I stem too. And look at the underlying base, fac. We've seen it before in the verb facio. What does facio mean? Make or do. So what does facilis mean literally? Doable. Things that are doable are easy. And the ablative singular of this word, what will it be? Excellent. Facili. It's I stem. The next word is primus a meaning first, foremost, chief, or principal. It's a first-second declension adjective. It's a combination of pro, meaning before or in front, and the superlative suffix in one of its incarnations, imus, I-M-U-S. So literally it means foremost. The next word is another first-second declension adjective, pulcher, pulchra, pulchrum, meaning beautiful, handsome, or fine. This adjective contracts, as you can see from the feminine of the nominative singular pulchra. So the base is pulchra, P-U-L-C-H-R. What do you think the English derivative of this word, pulchritude, means? Of course, beauty. Here's another adjective, sapien, sapientis, meaning wise. But it often serves as a substantive. So in many dictionaries, it's listed also as a noun, wise man. As a third declension adjective, wise, it's I stem. But as a noun, wise man, it's not. The base underlying this word, sapi, means having good taste, which is one way the ancient Romans saw wisdom. And here's another adjective, similis, simile, third declension, and thus I stem. It's another interesting word linguistically, deriving from an Indo-European root, sem, or som, that means one, or as one. It's seen in Latin semper, always, that is, for once and all time, and simul, at the same time, in other words, as one, together. In English, it appears as same. Now, what would this base be in Greek? What did we just say happened to initial S in Greek? It changed to H. So this base showed up in Greek as hen, the Greek for one, preserved in the English derivative henotheism, the worship of one God without the denial of other gods' existence. The next item in this vocabulary list is a reference to the irregular superlatives in the first part of this chapter. The forms facilimus, difficilimus, and similimus, meaning respectively easiest, hardest, and most similar. Also liberimus, pulcherimus, and acerimus, meaning freest, most beautiful, and sharpest. Following that are all the irregular comparatives and superlatives in the second part of the chapter, melior optimus, maior maximus, and so on. Please memorize these forms. Next is a verb, appello, first conjugation, meaning call or call by name or name. Literally, it means push, pel, toward, ad, with the implication attack, accost, or sue. In Roman society, that last sense, sue, produced the connotation call by name, because of the frequency with which people on trial were called by name, as in, Mr. Brutus, where were you on the morning of March 15th? The next word is maior, third declension. We've already covered its formation, but not all its senses. Its basic meaning, greater, to the Romans also implied older, because they understood maior natu, literally greater by or in terms of birth. Thus it also has a related sense, ancestors, elders. In this connotation it shows up almost always in the plural maiores, where it functions as a substantive, meaning literally those greater by birth or in years. So, If the Romans called their ancestors maiores, what do you think they called their descendants? Obviously, minores, literally those lesser in years. And the last word in this vocabulary is felix felicis, meaning lucky, fortunate, or happy, a third declension adjective, so it's I stem. Remember what we called this type of third declension adjective? No, not that. The correct term is one termination. Don't use bad language. As we noted before, Latin includes quite a few words drawn from agricultural contexts. Versus, altus, pax. The Romans did a lot of farming, so country metaphors made a lot of sense. Felix is one of these. Literally, it means fertile, abounding in produce or offspring. A felix plant produces lots of fruit. While the base of this adjective is grammatically phallic, the underlying linguistic root is just phe, which means cause to grow, make increase. Thus, etymologically, a femina is the female person growing a baby. And how does she do that? By giving it suckle, breastfeeding it. That's what femina means at heart. So, felices liberi, do the rules that were cited at the beginning of this chapter now make sense to you? If not, please review this presentation. If so, please proceed to the next slide. For the next class meeting, please bring in a copy of the practice and review sentences for Chapter 27 on pages 129 and 130. O minores maximi, certamen difficillimum vos manent, sed facillimum erit, si magna cum cura studebitis.